Chapter 2, and this is going to be a very short one. To be clear, the way that this Hollywood Babylon 2 is written, some of these chapters are a little bit longer, and some comparatively are really short. In addition, there are some chapters that are only visual chapters, meaning it's just photographs with very little written down. So from here on out, for this particular novel, just keep that in mind. If you get your own copy of Hollywood Babylon 2, there are a few more visual chapters. And with that said, we're going to get right into it. So chapter 2 is Getting Gloria's Goat. Ding, dong, the witch is dead. If Tinseltown ever had a witchy witch, not a play pretend witch like Margaret Hamilton, the sweetheart of Gramercy Park, that real, bona fide, black magical witch was none other than that of flower of Chicago stockyards, the late Gloria Swanson. Ding dong, the witch is dead. And not her maid, not her secretary, not her effete sixth husband can bring old Gloria back to life again. Gloria's gone. Sic transit Gloria Mundi. There's a couple of photographs in her in this particular chapter. But literally, that's it. It's less than 100 words. Thank you for listening. Moving on to Chapter 3. Killer Kelly. Suck. Stage and screen were battling it out in a Hollywood apartment that spring evening, and stage was down for the count. Screen had had a few drinks too many, and in a fit of frenzy dragged stage along the rug, knocking over a Spanish Revival table. He then proceeded to thump stage's head against the wall. It was April 16, 1927. In the screen corner, Paul Kelly, 26, 180 pounds, a lean, tough six-footer with an athletic build, a red-headed and red-blooded Irish-American movie star who had grown up on the streets of Brooklyn. His dad had owned a saloon named Kelly's Cafe, which was located near the Vitagraph studio. Vitagraph scenic workers who were in the habit of dropping in for a drink at Kelly's soon also got into the habit of borrowing furniture for their sets from Mrs. Kelly. One day in 1907, in return for the favor, she insisted that her son be given an acting job at $5 a day. He was given one, and a career was launched. Kid Kelly worked on several Vitagraph films, one of them appropriately entitled Fit to Fight. The Moppet actor befriended the top studio stars of the day, John Bunny and Flora Finch, and was soon headed for Broadway, where he appeared opposite Helen Hayes in Booth Tarkington's Penrod. In 1926, Hollywood beckoned his most important film to date, Slide, Kelly, Slide, in which Kelly appeared with the popular young Lavender leading man William Haynes. He had been released just 3 weeks before this deadly brawl. His next film, Special Delivery, with Eddie Cantor and William Powell, was scheduled to come out the week after this stormy evening, but the young Irishman would be unable to attend the premiere. By then, his life and career would be complicated by a slight case of manslaughter. In the stage corner that fateful night was Ray Raymond, 33, 155 pounds, 5 feet 8, a wiry song and dance man who, after appearances in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1918 and 1919, was featured in Blue Eyes, a 1920 Broadway show. When he met a lively 17-year-old redhead in the cast named Dorothy McKay, it was love at first sight for Ray. They married. Dorothy had been born in Scotland at the ripe age of 4. She had toured the British Isles as a dancer, and she later turned to drama to receive fine notices for her work in a production of Peg o' My Heart, which ran for 2 years. But the young girl was plagued by a slight lisp, and self-conscious about it, decided this might impair her career in high drama. Little Dottie decided to concentrate on farce and musical roles, in which she might use her lisp for comic effect. She had 2 of her biggest successes in Head Over Heels, and later as Lady Jane in Oscar Hammerstein's The Second's Rose Marie. The Raymonds had recently arrived in Hollywood. Sound was in the works. In a few months' time, the jazz singer would startle the world. Everyone was already talking about the talkies. The prospect of singing an audible movie career had drawn the musical Raymonds to Tinseltown. They appeared in a Vitaphone short that recorded one of their vaudeville acts and were soon known as one of the most high-spirited and hard-drinking young couples around town. The fisticuffs in Ray's apartment were over the affections of Mrs. Raymond. There was a classic triangle. Kelly was a good friend of Ray's, but an even better friend of Mrs. Ray. The town had been nattering about the dalliance of handsome, thin-lipped Kelly with petite, hot-stuffed Dorothy. Kelly had learned that Ray had been complaining to their friends about, quote, that son of a bitch Irishman who's been trying to steal my wife, end quote. That's a good quote, by the way. Earlier that evening, he had already gone through half a quart of scotch. Half a quart of scotch? Oh, Jesus. And I thought I was a drinker. Kelly called up Ray, who had just returned from an engagement in San Francisco. A shouting match ensued over the phone. Ray was already half blotto, too, and Raymond dared Kelly to come over to his house if he was a man. By the time Kelly got there, he was 9/10 blotto. This was the Hollywood of the Roaring Twenties, the title of one of Kelly's later films, when gin came in bathtubs, not bottles. Paul and Dottie partied around a good deal with their movie friends. There were parties in Paul's apartment, at the Raymond home, at Lila Lee's, at John Bowers's, and at the house of director Louis Milestone and actress Nancy Carroll. Gin wingdings, where everyone gathered in the kitchen with the shades down and mixed the booze with anything available that would camouflage the taste. That actually sounds pretty good. If Dottie had been there, she might have been able to separate the two enraged studs, but if you went to chercher la femme, it would have been in vain. Later, in her testimony at the trial, she declared that she had been downtown, quote, shopping for Easter eggs, end quote. There were 3 witnesses to the mortal brawl, and they made an odd trio. Ethel Lee, the panic-colored maid, whose main concern was to save the furniture. 4-year-old Valerie Raymond, who was later brought up as Mimi Kelly, and had a brief career in the 50s in Broadway musicals. And Dottie's dog Spot, who barked away and added to the general confusion, even in the Hollywood of the 20s, where members of the gay set dyed their pooches purple. This was a mutt that attracted all eyes wherever it went. The heroic fox terrier sported a wooden leg. One front leg had been bitten off when Spot defended Dottie's niece from a police dog that had attacked the child. With maid, child, and pooch as audience, Ray kept coming back for more punishment. Kelly held him by the throat with one hand and smacked him in the face several times with his other fist. After the song and dance man had had his head rapped against the wall by Kelly a few times, he was hearing birdies. Having made his point, or whatever he thought was his point, Kelly staggered on home. Dottie arrived soon afterwards with her Easter eggs to find the apartment in its shambles. She helped her husband to his feet and propelled him to the bedroom. He dropped into bed, fully clothed, made a joke with the maid about the fight, then passed out. The next morning, Dottie and Ethel Lee found him unconscious. 2 days later, he was dead. Dottie called a doctor's friend, Walter Sullivan, who knew as well as she did that if word of the brawl got out, Dottie's and Paul's career might be ruined. Dr. Sullivan declared that Ray's death had been due to complications resulting from past illnesses. Ethel Lee did not, however, hold up very long under intense police questioning. The maid gave in and described the Donnybrook, remarking on how furiously Kelly had kicked Ray when he was down and how he had slammed his head against the wall. The actor was arrested. In a statement to police, Captain Slaughter... I do think that was his actual name. Whatever. Okay. In a statement to police, Captain Slaughter, he confessed that he loved Mrs. Raymond, but said that his love had never been returned. He was charged with manslaughter. Dottie and Dr. Sullivan were charged with compounding a felony by attempting to conceal facts as to the death of Raymond. The charges against Sullivan were later dismissed. The trial of Paul Kelly was a model in melodrama that played to a full house. The prosecution produced dozens of his letters to Dottie. The maid had found them, hidden, ironically enough, under the conjugal mattress. In one of them he wrote, "I'm crazy about you." He even tried his hand at pig Latin. I uve uye arling de. I'm not going to read that. The letters were read in court while Pauline changed color and sweat glistened on his forehead. The sob sisters of the tabloid press had a ball with the story. One front page item in the Herald Examiner clucked that it would have been far more tasteful if Paul had said it with flowers instead of in silly pig Latin. This was the first eruption of this nutty lingo into Tinseltown consciousness. 6 years later, they had climaxed with the opening of Busby Berkeley's film Gold Diggers of 1933, in which Ingergay Ogersay sang, "We're in the money," in pig Latin. The courtroom vibrated with excitement when Dorothy took the stand as the star witness for the defense. Necks were craned to permit eyes a better look at her. Some of the craners were disappointed. Dottie was not glamorous. She did not square up to anyone's image of a femme fatale. She was of medium height, with shingled red hair and odd oriental eyes, and for a lassie born in Scotland. Her face was pert, sensitive, and intelligent. She refused to play to the gallery. In spite of her troubles, her demeanor was proud and aloof, preventing the jurors from talking to her or taking her to their hearts. She did not admit to loving Kelly. He was a good friend, that was all. He was trying to help her love her, in her own way, but her attitude was almost one of disdain for the court. She glared defiantly at the district attorney as he cross-examined her. "So, Miss McKay, you partied around, as you say, with Mr. Kelly. Did you consider his attentions proper?" "Why, yes. Nobody thought anything of it." "And why not?" "Well, you see, Hollywood is different. We accept violation of convention because it is all right for us. And that is, professional people are less conventional, more sophisticated." "So unconventional," the DA promptly nailed her, "that you kill when someone is in the way." Tension at the trial was temporarily broken when some comic relief arrived in the person of Tenno Yobu, Kelly's Japanese houseboy, who was nicknamed Jungle. When Jungle Oh boy. When Jungle was called to the stand, he brought down the house with his account of the pajama patties that had often taken place in Paul's apartment. They told of serving breakfast in bed to Dottie and Paul, garnished with aspirins and Alka-Seltzer for their hangovers. Jungle's testimony was of no help to his boss. Paul and Dottie had steadfastly denied any intimacy. Other testimony did appear to be helping Paul's case a bit. However, many Hollywood friends were called in as character witnesses. James Kirkwood and Lila Lee, parents of James Kirkwood Jr., the author of A Chorus Line, director Louis Milestone, Nancy Carroll, Marguerite Delamotte. They gave the impression that Kelly was a good egg, but with loyal friends. But the jury still arrived at a verdict of manslaughter. The actor was sentenced to serve from 1 to 10 years in state's prison, San Quentin. Dorothy was in a downtown hotel room, surrounded by news hands, when a phone call informed her of Paul's sentence. She looked as if she were about to faint. She then caught herself up, straightened up, and whispered with a trace of arrogance, "Well, that's that." Her casualness about the verdict led the print cacklers to headline their columns the next day with scoops about a rift between Dottie and Paul. They were disabused a few weeks later, when she risked a great deal by going to see Kelly before he was taken to San Quentin. Paul had been let out of the L.A. jail in the custody of a sheriff in order to arrange his business affairs. This was to be done at the home of a friend, Ben Wilson. Behind her cold mask, Dottie was at heart une grande amoureuse. She was out of bond, pending the result of her own trial. The jury's good impression of her was vital to her defense, and yet she risked everything to go and see her lover. While Mrs. Wilson gave the sheriff a tour of the house and grounds to distract him, the couple sat down on the couch and held hands, and were in a sense, then and there, married, though not legally. They had been through hell together, but it had not turned them against each other. Both had matured considerably, and their love had survived the ordeal. It was stronger than ever. It was all really like a movie script. The next day's headlines blared the news of this clandestine tryst. Then, after deliberating only 2.5 hours, the day before Kelly left for the big house, the jurors on Dottie's case found her guilty as charged. Judge Burnell sentenced her to 1 to 3 years, also to be served at San Quentin Penitentiary. A sob sister visited her soon afterwards in the L.A. jail. She was asked why she had gone to see Paul, knowing full well that if news of her visit got out, it would hurt her case. She replied, "I had to do it. I couldn't let him be sent up like that without trying to make him see that whatever has been done is done. But there is still a future for us. Perhaps his career is finished. Some people think so. But he's still young. He's a fighter, and I think there's a good chance that it isn't. I wanted him to realize that. I wanted to give him hope and let him know that if I get out before he does, I'll be waiting for him." Though she had lost everything, she was not thinking of herself for once, but of Paul. After their conviction, a story appeared about them that began with a poem. Once they had a penny. Yellow was the hay. Now they haven't any. They heard the piper play. Kelly did not even wait in L.A. County Jail as he was entitled to in order to appeal the sentence. "I want to get it over with," he declared. He proved a model prisoner at San Quentin. The talkies came in with a bang, and Kelly read everything he could about the technique of sound films. He took courses in elocution and voice projection. He sensibly believed that keeping busy, planning for the future, was the best way for him to avoid going bananas. Dorothy did wait in the L.A. County jail for 7 months, but when she lost her appeal and was then denied clemency by Governor C.C. Young, she was transported north to the grim confines of California's Big House. She did not idle there either. She took notes on the condition of the women prisoners and listened whenever she could to the life stories, real or invented, of her fellow inmates. In later years, she would put her prison experience to good use. She organized a drama club for women prisoners and directed plays in the pen. One of her productions had an all-killer cast, featuring the notorious hammer murderess Clara Phillips and Dorothy Ellingson, the jazz slayer. A visitor received Dottie's version of the manslaughter case. "After the fight, Paul apologized to my husband. Ray accepted it and told him that all was forgiven. They could remain friends. Ray died 2 days later. The inquest showed he died of kidney trouble and cerebral hemorrhage, induced not by the fight with Paul, but by acute alcoholism. We were all crazy to be drinking so much. All of us, we were silly pigs. I was horrified to find they had been fighting over me. Ray had been mean to me since he found out about Paul, but I still cared for him. Why, Ray would have been the first one to come to Paul's defense. If he had survived, they would have remained friends. They fought like 2 kids, but those guys really liked each other. And before Ray died, he pleaded with me not to let Paul's name be dragged into the case. I've had lots of fights in my life, Dot, dear, he told me. This thing was just another stupid brawl. It was as much my fault as his. Keep Paul's name out of it. And because I kept the promise I gave to my dying husband, a jury convicted me of compounding a felony." Dottie was afraid the prison would mar her looks. She held on to her dream of making a stage comeback when released. She remembered the rave reviews she had received when she appeared with Richard Bennett in The Dove. Bennett, the father of Joan and Constance, had been a popular matinee idol in his prime, and he can be seen as old Major Amberson in Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons. She took care to maintain her self-respect by making herself up carefully every day in her cell. She soon discovered that other women prisoners, in the midst of the horrors of captivity, attempted to cling to their smartness and beauty. Quentin was one of the nation's toughest jails, but in those days, women inmates were allowed a few privileges. They were permitted to fashion their own clothing and garnish their blue denim uniforms in a style suitable to their personalities. Dottie became a fashion advisor for the girls. They loosened up and unburdened themselves to her. Her time in Stir was an extraordinary learning experience for the actress. Dorothy McKay was out in a year, paroled for good behavior. Kelly was released for good behavior after 25 months. They were married in 1931. It was a good marriage and lasted until death did them part. Women in Prison, a play by Dorothy McKay, was produced in 1932 and attracted much favorable attention. It was bought by Warner Brothers and brought to the screen in 1933 as Ladies They Talk About, directed by William Keighley. It starred Barbara Stanwyck as a hard-boiled gun mole. The fine supporting cast included Preston Foster, Lillian Roth, Maude Eburn, and Ruth Donnelly. It was lensed by the great cinematographer John Seitz, who had been the masterful cameraman of Valentino's The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The script of this effective prison comedy melodrama was very strong and marked by both humor and compassion. The movie had several brushes with the Hayes office, and Warner's was eventually obliged to trim a few scenes concerning the lust of the man-hungry women inmates. These scenes were based not only on Dottie's observations, but of her fellow prisoners, but on her own frustrated body's knowledge that her lover was just a few dozen cells away. Ladies They Talk About was remade by Warner's in 1942 as Lady Gangster with Faye Emerson, Julie Bishop, Ruth Ford, and Jackie Gleason. Dottie never got to see the second film version of her play. Bratface, as she was affectionately called by Kelly, was driving home to the Kelly Mack Ranch, the couple's home near Northridge in the San Francisco Valley on January 5, 1940. The car skidded on a soft shoulder and turned over 3 times. She was pinned under the wheel. Dorothy McKay, dead at 37. Hollywood, which can be cruel and hypocritical, can on occasion be kind if real talent is involved, accompanied by real drive and ambition. After his release, Kelly returned to the screen and enjoyed a successful career for another quarter of a century. He appeared in several hundred movies and scored heavily in his 1933 return film, Broadway Through a Keyhole, based on a story by Walter Winchell, in which he appeared with Constance Cummings, Russ Columbo, and Texas Guinan. After that, he worked continuously, often making more than 5 movies a year. It is bizarre that this ex-con, although he was occasionally seen as a mobster, was often cast as an authority figure. He played a prison warden. In Torchy Blane in Panama, he was a police lieutenant. In Fear of the Night and Side Street, he was a police officer. The hard-bitten quality that he emanated made him equally creditable as slouch hat cop or slouch hat gangster. In Cecil B. DeMille's The Story of Dr. Wassel, he was a Navy officer. He worked for every one of the major studios, alongside Judy Garland and Lana Turner in MGM's opulent The Ziegfeld Girl, and on dozens of B pictures at Republic and Monogram. He appeared with big names: Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Cagney, Bogart, Stanwyck, Betty Davis. His best film of all was probably Raoul Walsh's The Roaring Twenties, one of the greatest of all gangster movies. It was made at Warner's, and although Kelly did not work with there more than other studios, there was something of the typical Warner Brothers act about him. Most actors at Warner's during the great years of the studio, now long since past, looked like just folks, not like movie stars. And Kelly was never a glamour boy. He was a solid, believable actor with a believable presence that lent credibility to whatever sort of film he appeared in. Although he was friendly with Cagney, Pat O'Brien, and Frank McHugh, off the set he did not run around with Warner's famed Irish Mafia. He spent most of his leisure hours with Dorothy and a few close friends. His most memorable performance was as Gloria Graham's strange boyfriend in RKO's Crossfire. And believe it or not, this ex-con played in 2 movies at Warner's written by prison wardens: Invisible Stripes, based on the memoirs of Warden Laws, and Duffy of San Quentin, based on Clinton T. Duffy's The San Quentin Story. In it, Kelly starred as Warden Duffy, playing the warden of the very prison in which he himself had been a prisoner for over 2 years. Dottie never lived to see Paul's 2 great theatrical successes. In 1947, he made a triumph return to the Broadway stage in Kermit Bloomgarden's long-running production of William Wister Haynes' Command Decision. For his magnificent performance as Air Force Brigadier General Dennis, outwardly hard-boiled but inwardly compassionate, Kelly won the Donaldson Award, the Variety Critics Award, and the Tony for Best Actor of 1948. He returned to Broadway in 1951 and scored another triumph as Frank Elgin, the alcoholic actor opposite Uta Hagen in the Strasbourg production of Clifford Odets' The Country Girl. Unfortunately, when these plays were made into movies, the studio opted for big star names in the leads. Clark Gable played Dennis in MGM's version of Command Decision. Bing Crosby was cast as Elgin opposite Grace Kelly in Paramount's version of The Country Girl. Neither of them matched Kelly's stage performances. On November 6, 1956, Paul Kelly died of a heart attack in his California home shortly after returning from voting for Stevenson. That is the end of that chapter.